This is over Algebra 1 10.3, and we are solving radical equations. All right, so a radical equation is an equation that has a radical expression with a variable inside the radicand. So for example, it could have like a square root of x or a cube root of x or a fourth root of x or so on. Today we're going to limit it to square roots and cube roots. So what they mean is the variable is inside the square root or inside the cube root. So to solve a radical equation involving a square root, you first isolate the radical on one side of the equation if necessary, and then you eliminate the radical and solve for the variable. So what that means is, here's your square root of x. You isolate it, meaning you get it by itself first. So you subtract the 5, and you get square root of x equals 8. Okay, now to get rid of a square root, the inverse of a square root is squared, so you square both sides. So the square root and the squared essentially cancel each other out, and they are x equals, and then 8 squared is 64. Okay, let's try this one. So we want to get the square root of x by itself. So first we want to move the 3. A common mistake is to see this subtraction sign and think that we add 3, but the subtraction sign is attached to the square root. So look at the 3 is positive. So how we move the 3 is by subtracting it. So we subtract 3, we have negative square root of x equals 0 minus 3 is negative 3. All right, think of this negative square root of x as negative 1 square root of x. Now we cannot square yet. You have to have this square root symbol all by itself. So we want to divide by negative 1 on both sides. So we get the square root of x equals positive 3. And then now the square root is by itself. So now to get the square root to go away, you are going to square it because the inverse of a square root is squared. So you square both sides and you get x equals 9. Okay. On this problem, we want to get this whole square root by itself. So we want to get this alone. The first thing we do is we subtract the 3. So we get 4 square root x plus 2 equals 16. All right, now I'm still not ready to square yet because I need to get this square root by itself. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to divide by 4 because the 4 is multiplying by the square root. I do that on both sides. So I have the square root of x plus 2 equals 4. Okay, now the square root is by itself, so now you are ready to square both sides because the squared and the square root cancel. And on this side we get 16. And so to solve, now you can subtract the 2, and you get x equals 14. Okay, sometimes we have a square root on both sides of the equal sign. So notice we have a square root on the left and a square root on the right. So we go ahead and we just square both sides, and we're left with 2x minus 1 equals x plus 4. And that works because there's a square root on each side. So then you just solve. If the x is on one side, I'm going to subtract x. I get x minus 1 equals 4. Add the 1, and I get x equals 5. Okay, so like on this one, there's square roots on both sides, so just square both sides. You get 4x minus 3 equals x plus 9. Subtract the x, so you get 3x minus 3 equals 9. Add the 3, and then divide by the 3 that's by the x. So I get 3x equals 12, divide by 3, x equals 4. Okay, and then last but not least here, we're going to do it with a cube root. So it's the same concept where you have to get the cube root by itself first. So we're going to subtract the 7. So we get the cube root of x equals negative 8. Okay, to get rid of a cube root, you are going to, the inverse of a cube root is to cube it, take it to the power 3. Make sure that you put it in parentheses. Anytime that the number, whether you're squaring it or cubing it, if this number is negative, put it in parentheses with the cubed outside. Or if you're squaring it, put it in the parentheses with the squared outside. So that's important when the number is negative. So we're going to cube it. We get x equals, we type in our calculator, negative 8 to the third. We get negative 512. And if you want to just kind of go back up to example 1 and show you, you could get in the habit and always put it in parentheses, and then you don't have to worry about watching out for when it's negative. If you just got into that habit, that'd be a great thing to do. That way you would never miss no problem for that kind of a mistake. Okay, so on this one, the cube root is already by itself. You can't pull out the 2 or the 5 because it's inside the cube root. So you are ready to cube both sides. So we're left with 5x minus 2, and then 12 to the 3rd power. You just use a calculator because we don't know that off the top of our heads. We get 1,728, and then we're going to add the 2, and we're going to divide by 5. And we're left with 346.